BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Alright, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? Just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we truly begin. Firstly, I would like to thank everyone who has been following the Zodiac Monday episodes, as well as the newly launched Jack the Ripper report, which has been coming out on Wednesdays. And yes, every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper as well. And I also invite you to go through some links in the description box, including one for BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88 allows you to make a donational contribution to help the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And now there is the Black Box Online Radio membership, and it's $10 a month. Think of it as a $10 a month plus club, and it gives you some bonus features and bonus content. And please feel free to check it out at BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88. And also please look out for more short episodes that will be released on Instagram, Facebook, and here on the YouTube Shorts page for Black Box Online Radio. Now, to get into today's topic, in the 20th century, perhaps the most famous double murder that took place, the most famous double homicide that happened, was the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, which put O.J. Simpson on trial. And if you would like to dispute that with me, I mean, you can put your idea in the comment section down below if you think there was a more famous double homicide. And I'm always curious what you guys think about these subjects. But the trial of O.J. Simpson was frequently referred to as the trial of the century. The crimes were referred to as the crimes of the century, because O.J. Simpson wasn't just an ordinary average Joe. He was a former professional football player who was still involved with football, being a commentator for sports networks, as well as being the spokesman for Hertz rental cars. And very famously, O.J. Simpson was a good football player in his prime. He was the first person to rush for 2,000 yards, running for 2,003 yards with the Buffalo Bills, and it really took the world by storm, because just seeing somebody that they had looked up to or they had thought highly of, even if they knew about some of the dangers in his personal life, because, I mean, the media had shared a little bit of info about some of the domestic violence between O.J. Simpson and his now late wife, Nicole Brown Simpson. But this was a crime that just has really left people in a very unsettled way, because, firstly, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty, and that means that justice was never truly brought to the victims, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. And some people insist to this day that O.J. Simpson was innocent and that the real killer simply got away. Other people think that O.J. Simpson was guilty, and that's still the same end result. Justice was never brought to Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. Earlier this year on the channel, I had the opportunity to talk to you guys about the book Ron's Revenge, which was written by a true crime writer named Chris Todd, and I invite you to listen to that episode and give your take on the subject. I also highly recommend his book. But this episode isn't going to so much focus on those alternative theories in the O.J. Simpson case, which you can read a little bit about in Chris Todd's book, although he doesn't get too wild with some of it. Some people out there are way more extreme, such as Stephen Singular or William C. Deere. They have O.J. is innocent theories that are way, way beyond just simply what Chris Todd explores in his book. He mostly talks about O.J. Simpson having an accomplice, and that O.J. Simpson was definitely involved at the crime scene, guilty of murder. It's just there's an overlooked suspect that we should examine. And one more time, his book is called Ron's Revenge. But as far as the title of this episode goes, let's look at some of the thought processes that could have been involved with O.J. Simpson, because I really have noticed that a lot of, well, there's just this thing that stands out to me in a lot of documentaries and interviews and other podcasts and people talking about the subject, and it relates to a very particular piece of dialogue that was shared in O.J. Simpson's interview that he did with Judith Regan for Fox Television, when he was telling the story when he was promoting the book If I Did It, which he didn't author himself. The book was actually written by Pablo Nieves, and O.J. Simpson is more or less taking all the credit for it, but it was ghost-written. I think that is a fair way of putting it, but Pablo Nieves definitely believed that O.J. was guilty. And in the Judith Regan interview, O.J. is talking about how he could have committed the murders in a particular way if he had done it, if he did it. It's called If I Did It. And one thing he says is that an individual named Charlie comes to his home, which is the Rockingham estate, and then he says, hey, you got to go over to Nicole Brown Simpson's house. Something is going down. So OJ and Charlie go together to Nicole Brown Simpson's house, and that is when the altercation kicks off. And there is some type of something that pushes OJ over the edge, and the murders take place, and that Ron Goldman was very simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I've always been bothered by that because, number one, it's also been widely discussed that Nicole Brown Simpson wasn't at home for the majority of the evening on the night that she was murdered. She went to La Mezzaluna, the restaurant where Ron Goldman worked, and she left behind a pair of glasses. And the glasses were hers, but they had originally belonged to her mother, and Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson were friends, and Ron Goldman knew that they were important to her, so he's walking up to the Bundy estate where Nicole Brown Simpson lived to return the glasses. But here's the biggest problem that I have with all of these media sources zoning in on that, or even O.J. Simpson talking about himself, telling the story of how, okay, Charlie came over and says that something's going down at Nicole Brown Simpson's house. Well, most people just look at the conventional narrative that Nicole Brown Simpson came home and she just started taking a bath. She drew a bath, the water's pouring into the tub, and she even lit candles for the bath, and that she is just getting into the bathtub, and that really has nothing to do with any type of outside activity at all. And it was always so puzzling and bizarre to me, that particular detail. Again, talking about someone's thought process that could lead to murder. There are two possibilities, okay, let's say three possibilities that people have truly explored, and one of them is just that O.J. Simpson went there to harass her, and that he made up the thing about how there's anything involved with something going down at Nicole Brown Simpson's house. The second, and this is what I'm much more curious about, is that Nicole Brown Simpson had a friend named Faye Resnick who went into rehab shortly before her murder. And Faye Resnick had problems with, well, cocaine. Let's just get to the heart of the issue. She had a drug problem, going into debt, and that Nicole Brown Simpson may have arranged for a way for Faye to borrow money from O.J., using Nicole as the intermediary, and that O.J. Simpson went to confront her about a cocaine debt, and that's something that he would have kept quiet on, because that would have just made things absolutely worse for him, or that definitely would have made him look guilty in the criminal trial, as well as in civil court. He would have looked very, very guilty. He talks about how he's given somebody drug money and he's trying to get it back, or just even to have a confrontation about it. And, I mean, that's something that I think is a one way of reconciling all of the information. And the third one is one that I haven't talked about in a very long time, and that is the theory that O.J. Simpson was actually in cahoots with a serial killer named Glenn Rogers, who was the Casanova killer. And Glenn Rogers reportedly admitted to his family that he was responsible for the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson. He was a real serial killer. He knew Nicole Brown Simpson. They had gone out for drinks at least twice, and he did commit the majority of his murders by knife, and, I mean, all of that would be very suspicious except for the pile of forensic evidence in favor of O.J. Simpson's guilt. Now, I just have to always share this additional detail. It is possible that Glenn Rogers also committed a murder of another individual, a man that he committed by strangulation, and this just goes to show you that serial killers don't always operate within the same pattern of behaviors. Sometimes they step outside the pattern because they want to protect themselves, or they don't want to get caught. If they think someone is a threat to them, then they will use a different method to try and commit murder. I mean, I just have to always throw that in there because some people think that serial killers have to commit crimes in the same way every time. Now, those are possibilities. And I mean, I think that the second option is one way of providing a certain explanation as to what happened with OJ. But in this episode, this True Crime Talk Radio episode, I want to be very clear that I'm going to examine the possibility of CTE being involved in the murders, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and this is something that gets discussed more and more frequently, not only with football players, but I was also recently doing an episode about the Benoit murders, the murders of Nancy and Daniel Benoit, which were committed by Chris Benoit, the WWE wrestler. And I think that it's also something that affects anyone involved with contact sports, and that is how head injuries can alter somebody's personality, impulse control, judgment, making, and like decision making. All of that can be affected. And I remember reading a comment that had been shared by somebody just talking about how their father was a doctor and said that almost certainly he thought that O.J. Simpson had CTE. But the issue is that you cannot know this truly until somebody has passed away and then their brain can be examined. And later on in this episode, I'll be talking about the movie Concussion, which stars Will Smith. But the big takeaway from that movie Concussion is when they actually just give a breakdown of what CTE is and how it functions and how it operates. And it is that the brain has all of these functions going on, not only things like blood vessels, but also things like neurotransmitters. And CTE is almost when proteins enter into the brain, or there's an excess of proteins in the brain. And I've always heard that stuff in the past, and I was like, well, what does that exactly mean? Proteins, this and that, there's too much protein in the brain, what's going on? Well, what was shared in the movie Concussion with Will Smith is that it's almost like taking concrete and pouring it into pipes, and then certain pipes get blocked, and then things have to be rerouted, and they have to move in a different way, and they have to function in a different way. And that is why people who have CTE have altered personalities as well as altered judgment skills, decision-making skills, and it leads people toward destructive behavior because their impulse control is completely haywire. Their decision-making capabilities are completely haywire. Now, with somebody like O.J. Simpson, I think it's entirely possible, except for the fact that outside of the several incidents that we know, he doesn't seem to have been as intensely affected as some of the other NFL players, and they go through a whole list of them in the movie Concussion with Will Smith about people who just absolutely cannot function in normal life, and they just end up taking their own lives. They're hearing voices that are driving them to commit harm to other people, and I mean, O.J. Simpson definitely seems like he has a certain amount of control of his mental faculties, even into his 70s, but in the tradition of True Crime Talk Radio, this is a segment where I talk about multiple different subjects, and one of the cases that I've wanted to share with you guys and talk to you guys about on Black Box Online Radio for some time has been the story of Philip Adams, who would be a much more extreme case of CTE. And he actually went on to commit 6 murders in a very bizarre crime spree. And I'm going to go over to an article from ESPN.com to help us out, and it's called Autopsy of Ex-NFL Player Philip Adams Accused of Killing 6 People Shows Unusually Severe CTE. Rock Hill, South Carolina. An autopsy revealed unusually severe brain disease in the frontal lobe of the former NFL player accused of fatally shooting 6 people in Rock Hill, South Carolina before killing himself in April of 2021. The 20 years that former cornerback Philip Adams Adams spent playing football definitely gave rise to a diagnosis of stage 2 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, said Dr. Ann McKee, who examined the brain. Authorities have said that on April 7th, Adams killed Rock Hill physician Robert Leslie, as well as his wife Barbara and their 2 grandchildren, 9-year-old Ada Leslie and 5-year-old Noah Leslie, and 2 HVAC technicians who were working at the Leslie home named James Lewis and Robert Shook, who were both 38 years old. Police later found Adams with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. And I think it means they later found him dead, and he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The degenerative disease known as CTE is linked to head trauma and concussions, and that is shown to cause a range of symptoms, including violent mood swings and memory loss. Well, I mean, just think of that. If certain passages in the brain are blocked, or let's just say certain passages and certain transmissions in the brain are affected by the excess of proteins, or they're affected by CTE in general, because I'm going to be clear, I'm not a medical doctor, I think you guys know that. It's just that if they are affected in this way that I had described previously, then new ways are going to take shape, and there's going to be just somewhat of a chaotic setup in the brain, and in chaos is going to be going in all different types of directions. That's what mood swings would lead to be. That's what memory loss would be. I mean, someone is remembering things and then they're forgetting things. Someone is going through fits of anger and then fits of sadness and then maybe even fits of euphoria. I mean, you can definitely have highs and lows of people who have brain issues and brain injuries. There were inklings that this is talking about Philip Adams. There were inklings that he was developing clear behavioral and cognitive issues, McKee said. I don't think he snapped. It appeared to be a cumulative progressive impairment. He was getting increasingly paranoid and he was having increasing difficulties with his memory, and he was likely to have more and more impulsive behaviors. It may not have been recognized, but I doubt that this was entirely out of the blue. To look at a more contemporary article that came out almost immediately after the murders, I would like to go to HeraldOnline.com, and this is called "A Year After Ex-NFL Player Killed 6 People, No One Can Explain Philip Adams' Acts." And this was published on April 6th of 2022 by Andrew Dice, 1 year after the crimes took place. On the sunny afternoon of April 7, 2021, around 4:45 p.m., former NFL player Philip Adams hopped on a four-wheeler and left the Rock Hill house where he lived with his parents. When he returned a while later, Adams had fatally shot 6 people. Hours after that, the York County Sheriff's deputies were surrounding his house after they had evacuated his father and disabled mother. Adams killed himself. He was 32 years old. A year later, after brain experts said Adams had a chronic brain injury that may have come from repetitive football trauma, no one is sure why he committed the violence. Well, I think that that's just it. I mean, and this is also heavily explored throughout the movie Concussion with Will Smith, that people are experiencing things that are just creations within their own brain. I mean, we're talking about neurotransmitters firing off. We're talking about not being able to control impulses. We're talking about emotions going up and down like an elevator. It's because of brain damage. It's not because there is a specific motive or that someone is actually angry about any real injustice. It could be something that is somewhat of a fabrication within their own mind. And, I mean, it's not even really, I don't even like using the word within their own mind. It's a result of brain damage, is perhaps a better way of putting it. The killings for a few days was one of the biggest stories in America because of the confluence of gun violence and football fame. Well, I mean, this isn't even a gun violence issue. This is a CTE issue. Adams' father, Alonzo Adams, said earlier this week in a telephone interview with the Herald that the past year has been very difficult. Alonzo Adams said that he and his family think about the victims and their families each day. We have not stopped praying for them. We send our prayers out to them. Our hearts continue to ache for them. Philip Adams played football at the Rock Hill High School before going on to play at SC State University, South Carolina State that is, and later in the NFL. He played defensive back. Adams played for the San Francisco 49ers, Oakland Raiders, New England Patriots, New York Jets, and Atlanta Falcons before his career was ended due to injuries. He played professionally from 2010 to 2016. After football, Adams had physical and emotional troubles. His family and his sports agent said, He sought a disability claim from the NFL, but was denied. His family said that in December of 2021, when they made a statement when the results of his brain injuries were revealed. At the time of his death, Philip Adams lived at his parents' home despite having a good living in the NFL. Alonzo Adams said he continues to believe that medical problems caused by his son's years of playing football contributed to the violent act. And, I mean, I definitely think that would be the major issue. And as it stated at the beginning of the ESPN article, that Philip Adams had an unusually severe case of CTE, and that these head injuries are affecting the brain in a way that is making people lose control of their mental faculties. As far as the killings go, back to the article from Herald Online, Adams killed Dr. Robert Leslie, his wife Barbara Leslie, and two of their grandchildren, Ada and Noah, and the two HVAC workers, James Lewis and Robert Shook. Shook and Lewis were shot outside the home, Tolson said. Deputies interviewed a witness who saw Adams shoot Lewis and Shook, and the sheriff's office documents show. Adams then went into the house and shot the four Leslie family members who were in a workout room. Adams, who lived nearby, later shot himself at the family home on Marshall Road south of Rock Hill. Why did he do this? It remains a mystery. Deputies said they found more than 20 guns at the Adams home. The guns were all legally owned by Adams. Again, I don't even want to focus on that too much because I think that's a distraction. At the shooting scene, deputies found Adams' cell phone and other evidence that pointed to Adams, including bullet casings that matched Adams' guns that were used in the shooting. And yes, as far as that goes, I think that, yes, of course, he did it. He was the perpetrator, and I think that is widely accepted. I think that this article is just putting that in there to provide a little bit of clarity and saying, yes, indeed, he did it, putting an end to any possible conspiracy theories. The motive remains unclear, an authority figure said. Only one person, Philip Adams, knew the motive, and that person is not here. But again, I told you, in the movie Concussion with Will Smith, they show some depictions of people who are dealing with the effects of CTE, and one former football player is just shouting at his wife, saying that he has voices that are demanding that he hurt her and hurt the kids, and it's not about anything other than a mental health issue. And that's what you will see if you do watch the movie Concussion with Will Smith. And I couldn't believe that one actually came out about 8 years ago. I thought that it was much more recent. I guess the years go by much more frequently and much more faster than we can anticipate. The older you get, the faster time flies, so it seems. But if you do watch the movie Concussion, it features Will Smith playing a doctor named Bennett Olamalu, a Nigerian doctor who goes on to get his American citizenship. I guess I can call him a Nigerian-American doctor, but they discuss that throughout the duration of the movie. I saw it recently on Tubi, which is a streaming service that you can watch for free. And overall, Will Smith gave a good performance. However, his legacy is almost going to be forever tarnished by that slap at the Oscars that he gave to Chris Rock. And I think that it's almost impossible for anybody to even mention Will Smith without bringing up his antics at the Oscars, and which is a shame. I mean, that's a real shame because he did so many movies and projects that people were a fan of. Even if you go back to the days of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, or if you look at movies like Independence Day, not to mention, I mean, King Richard, which he won an Oscar for, and on the same night of the slap. But in the movie Concussion, he plays a Nigerian doctor, and he's talking in a Nigerian accent, and when he first started out, you could tell that he was doing a very convincing performance. However, he also just sounded so awkward. I mean, sometimes people criticize actors who play themselves in every role, or they talk in the same voice in every role, but Will Smith was really making an effort to put himself into character, and he was talking, again, in a Nigerian accent, and it just sounded so bizarre, and at first it wasn't completely believable, but as time went on in the movie, it seemed much more convincing, and you could really see that he was getting into the character. But as far as the discussions that they had on CTE, the movie Concussion talks about how somebody, this Dr. Bennett, Dr. Bennett Olamalu, recognized that there was a reason why these former football players were committing these violent acts, and it wasn't apparent in any of the tests that they were conducting. So he began to examine the brains in a different way, and then more or less his discovery was CTE, that this is what was happening. and it was a result of contact sports. And in the film, he was portrayed as somebody who, again, coming from Nigeria, did not watch American football, didn't know anything about American football, and it was the concept of sometimes outside eyes can have the best view of the game. And it was showing that, yes, there are real head injuries that can affect people's personality, judgment, and mood swings. And it's very possible that all of this was true with O.J. Simpson. I mean, with Philip Adams, it definitely seems to be the case. With Aaron Hernandez, he also had CTE, and Aaron Hernandez is also a former American murderer who went on to commit suicide. I say former only because he has passed away. And I think that this shows a very dark side of the world of football, as well as all contact sports, because as previously stated in this episode, Chris Benoit, the wrestler, also had head injuries, neck injuries that could have greatly affected his mood and personality. And it's not even about somebody's choices or this person is so deranged and they are so far gone and so disconnected from the external world with their decision making that they are doing very destructive things. Now, when people examine the Benoit murders, as I was talking about recently on the channel, it seems like Chris Benoit had a lot more control of his mental faculties than somebody such as Philip Adams. It seemed like that guy went berserk, for lack of a better term, and forgive my language on that, but it seemed like he was just progressively getting more and more out of control, and he was well beyond any type of mental reconciliation. But Chris Benoit had a certain degree of control of his faculties, and it's just an absolute tragedy that his wife and son died at his own hands. But impulse control and brain damage affecting his judgments and so on. And as far as O.J. Simpson goes, we won't really know that for any extended period of time, but I also want to be very clear about something. I believe that O.J. Simpson was guilty of the murders. Some people think that it was all a cover-up, or they think there was an alternative suspect. I just gave you one, Glenn Rogers. But I think that people should also recognize that brain injuries can lead someone to commit violent acts, but it's not the only factor. Because as long as somebody has the ability to make conscious choices the way that O.J. Simpson did, and the way that Chris Benoit did, then they are still responsible for their actions. Mood swings are one thing. Developing a violent temper is one thing. But if somebody still has that level of awareness, then they are still responsible, and they still have the ability to stop. They have the ability to walk away. They have the ability to go to mental health professionals. They have the ability to be institutionalized. Now, somebody like Philip Adams, he seems like a much more extreme case, and it seems like on the night of the murders, this is just my take on the subject, my personal response, what I think happened. As somebody who has just been reading news articles and looking into the case, it seems like by that point he had lost almost complete awareness of what he was doing. And that's just something that I think. And if you would like to dispute that, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below. And as far as challenge questions go, I would like to ask you guys something that I brought up once before on the channel, and that was, should O.J. Simpson belong in the Hall of Fame? And this was a question that was actually asked by ESPN. And, again, he was very accomplished NFL running back with the Buffalo Bills and the San Francisco 49ers, the first player to rush for 2,000 yards in a season. Should he belong in the NFL Hall of Fame? And my answer was yes, for the sole reason that he was not convicted of the murders, and in America we live by the standard of innocence until proven guilty. Even if you think that somebody did it, well, he was found innocent. And it doesn't mean that I would be friends with O.J. Simpson, or that I would go golfing with O.J. Simpson. Firstly, I don't play golf, and secondly, I don't want to spend an afternoon with O.J. Simpson. But also, he was found not guilty in the criminal court, therefore I would say that he should be in the NFL Hall of Fame. Now, however, somebody such as Chris Benoit, the WWE wrestler who murdered his family, or two members of his family, he should not be in the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, because even though Chris Benoit was not found guilty, he committed suicide before he was able to be convicted of those crimes. I believe he certainly would have been convicted if he had lived, and therefore, I mean, by all accounts, and for all intents and purposes, Chris Benoit was guilty of those crimes, and he had a very, very accomplished wrestling career, WCW and WWF/WWE. Even he was going to be a star on the ECW brand, which is all, I mean, it was all connected at that point. However, I just simply don't think that he should be in the Hall of Fame. But if you would like to dispute that with me, you can put your ideas in the comments section down below, and I would love to read your messages. There must be something in this episode that you agree with and something that you disagree with. Share what you think. Share what you think about O.J. Simpson and Philip Adams and Chris Benoit. And if you've watched the movie Concussion, you can give your response down there, what you think about it, what you think about Will Smith. I would love to read your messages, and thank you for listening to this episode of True Crime Talk Radio, and also thank you for tuning into the Anything Goes Friday segment. And that's all for me now, and I will see you over on Instagram. Until next time.